Welcome to Informed Cities, the Bachelor edition. I'm Reggie.
And I'm Jasmine.
And we're from ICLE Europe, Local Governments for Sustainability, based here in the green city of Freiburg. Today we want, obviously, to do something different. This session is about electric vehicles, and we work for a project called Green Charge that is funded to explore and promote electric vehicles. But we found that not everybody is won over by the idea of EVs, and not everyone finds the attraction of EV cities appealing. Not everything the EV industry is doing is right, and it hasn't yet generated consensus. So we recognize we're in a period of disruption and transition. We want to ignite the debate before it's too late. We want to see if we can gain some consensus, and we want to improve the tone of the debate around electric vehicles. So we're going to try and explore what the fairy tale is for electric mobility as we plan our cities going forward. So we want to try and tackle what's called transport tribalism. We don't want to be having this argument and debate for the next 30 years. We need to settle what we mean by sustainable transport in cities, and we'll be using you as the audience to help us through this session today. Right, Jasmine?
Yes, we will, exactly. And what we will do in this session is have you, the audience, the participants of this conference, find a statement on EVs that represents your vision for the future of electric mobility. So we have come up with 10 statements representing opinions and visions for electric mobility. And we will ask you to choose one you agree with the most, so to say your fairy tale ending. And we will have multiple rounds of voting until the final fourth round, and only 2 statements remain. In the first round, you will be introduced to the 10 statements and then pick the 2 you agree with the least. In the next round, we will go into a bit more detail on these statements and what they actually mean, and then eliminate another 4. And then the remaining 4 quotes will be properly analyzed to, well, kick out another 2, and then we go into our grand finale. You don't need to remember all the details of how the voting works. We will be explaining that again each time we do it. Essentially, you just decide if you agree or disagree with something, and whenever we announce the voting is open, you get to make the choice which one stays and which one goes. And we will be doing this via Mentimeter. My colleague will actually be posting this in the link right now already. Obviously, voting is not open yet, but if you have a smartphone, go ahead and scan the code. But we will also be posting the link in the chat again at each round. So be ready if you're already on the website. Otherwise, it will be announced again. Now, some of you may have noticed that it says Informed Cities, the Bachelor edition on the program. That's also why we're holding these beautiful roses. So when we designed the session, we couldn't help but notice that there is a bit of a similarity between our concept and the reality TV show, The Bachelor. The premise of the show is that there is a bachelor or bachelorette, and they meet a group of potential partners, and then in multiple rounds pick their, true love. You don't need to know the show to participate in the session. If anything, congratulations for not watching trash TV. But if you do know it, today you get to be the bachelor or bachelorette and get to pick the electric mobility fairy tale ending you have always dreamed of. So to help you, the audience, make this decision, we have assembled a great team of experts on mobility who will, in each round, before you vote, provide their feedback on the statements. Reggie, would you like to introduce our wonderful experts to the audience?
Sure will. Thank you for the introduction. I'd like to start with inviting these brave EV experts. So we've invited people to give us our honest views today to talk about some of the hot topics or controversies with EVs at the moment, or do they actually see these aspects that we'll be discussing today as controversial? In the studio, firstly, today, I'd like to welcome Jana Höffner. Jana is a long-term EV driver turned advocate and communications guru. Jana's joined us from not far away in Stuttgart, so welcome. And you've also arrived by Tesla, which is very impressive. And you're working as the vice head and spokesperson of the independent organization Electrify-BW, Baden-Württemberg. We look forward to hearing from you today, Jana.
Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to now bring on Andrea for some Scottish flair. Welcome, Andrea. You're beaming in live from Scotland, and I understand you're the fleet manager for Changeworks, one of Scotland's largest environmental charities. and this is extremely impressive according to the Green Fleet magazine. You've been named as one of the 100 most influential people who have influenced the zero and low carbon fleet industry in the UK. So very happy to have you here. We should also mention in terms of Green Charge, you're coming in from the uptake city of Edinburgh, who we've been working with in Green Charge as a city. And I'm sure you're very proud of all the electric vehicles that are floating through Scotland's very attractive towns and countryside as a result of the work that you do. So look forward to your perspective today. Next up is Paul Mara. Welcome, Paul. You work with me on Green Charge, so we kind of know a little bit about each other, and you work for a company called Z Technology. I understand you're an entrepreneur in the automotive industry based in Norway, but you're engaged in a lot of different software areas and technology development. And a little bird told me that you consider or have considered yourself a bit of a petrol head. So I'd be interested to see if you've moved on to becoming an electron head rather than a petrol head in the past few years, and to help you justify being on the panel today. So it'd be great to hear from you. And finally, we have Patrick Peura. Patrick, hi there, Patrick. You're involved in the community that I'm involved with through the CIVITAS FastTrack project, where you're an advisory group member to us. FastTrack focuses on the acceleration of sustainable mobility and innovation in cities. And I know outside of that, you're a specialist in engaging investors and technology providers in how we develop the world around us in the future. So welcome to all four speakers today, and we really look forward to you informing this debate. We want you to challenge, confront, and hopefully justify some of the debates affecting transport planning in the e-mobility sector right now.
All right, well, I guess we're now entering the first stage of our little competition. And right now, you will have to immediately decide if you like what you hear or not. So this is really sort of answering the question, is this love at first sight? How do we do this, Reggie?
Well, I'm going to read out a top 10 list of EV claims that we've kind of harvested from the world of online commentary, social media, and professional opinion. Some of these you might consider to be a fairy tale, others might be a bad dream for you. So I'm going to read out these statements one by one, and we're going to do a very superficial exercise to begin with, where we're going to ask you to quickly make a agree or disagree sign. And as I go through each of these in turn, you'll be asked to simply display on screen whether you agree or disagree, and by this way the audience will know where there's consensus within the community of panelists that we have here, and where there's maybe some things where the audience differ with your opinion. So I'm going to go through and read these out one by one.
All right, let's hear the statements.
Okay.
We'll also be seeing them on the screen now.
Yeah. So the first one is, our current approach to EVs does not reduce car ownership enough. It's the panel's opinion there.
Andrea?
Okay, so we've got,
all right.
Yeah, so we've got maybe
Three agrees, one disagrees.
There's room for a different model of running EVs in our cities potentially. Okay, on to the next one. The private sector's role is to lead the funding of charging infrastructure. Okay, so we don't think you're willing to take responsibility for this agenda at the moment. Jasmine, do you want to?
Yes. Our third statement is city authorities should lead in providing public EV charging points. Oh, I thought everyone was going to agree, but Jana did not. All right. And the next one is electric cars give everyone a sustainable alternative to petrol or diesel cars. Okay, still no agreement by all four.
Well, this is quite good for the debate, isn't it?
It is.
Hopefully. Right, number 5 on the list. EV charging infrastructure belongs in our streets. Okay, So I guess we can define a bit later what we exactly mean by our streets, but there seems to be a role for that to be part of our civic infrastructure. And number 6 is EVs are not significantly better for cities than petrol or diesel cars. Okay, so
very interesting.
Again, studio member is being brave and disagreeing with the rest of the panel. Jasmine.
All right, yes. Number 7 is government incentives for EVs must focus on non-car options, like e-bikes, for example. All right, another half. And then the next one is, there won't be enough green energy for all cars to be electric. Oh, there seems to be consensus to disagree. Interesting.
So that's optimism about green energy, which is
let's find
good
out
for us
later
in
on
Green
if
Charge,
that's
I guess.
appropriate or not.
Yeah. So the fight, we're down to the final 2 that we'll read out. Electric vehicles play a key role in solving climate change. Okay, so again, we've got some EV optimists in the room. And then finally, out of the 10, EVs mean a better and more efficient technology development. So I guess this is referring to the more you have, the more technology progresses. So we kind of think, well, there's agreement there.
Paul can't decide on his answer for that one.
Okay, well, hopefully we'll explore these in a bit more detail for the phrases that get through to the next stages.
Because this is already now the first time you get to vote. As I said, first impression matters here. So please go to Mentimeter now. My colleague is again posting the link in the chat. And pick the 2 statements you disagree with the most. So the 2 statements you want out of this competition, right? What is your, well, let's say, least favorable vision of the future? Since this is the first time you heard these statements, you will have 2 minutes to read them again, reflect on what our experts told you, and then vote. And I'm going to open voting right now. 2 minutes start right now. So, Reggie, what do you think? I guess there was some consensus here by our experts on what the 2 would be that are going to get kicked out.
Well, I guess we've deliberately brought in a team of experts that we maybe are not sure how well this reflects what the audience thinks, and we don't also know who's tuned in today. So I guess we'll pretty soon find out if we have a team of environmentalists that have suddenly joined the call to influence the direction of electric mobility, or if we have some members of the public and researchers and local government officials who we hope to attract to inform cities that are more in tune with our panel here today.
If we have more people also in the audience who also own a Tesla, might like to drive it, even though I was surprised by some of the answers Jana gave. So, but that doesn't have to mean anything. Okay, we have about, I think, 1 more minute. So if you're still voting, please make your choices soon. 2 will be kicked out. And then we will go into a bit more detail in the next round.
Sure, well.
Okay. Do you know what your favorite would be, or your favorite vision for the future, Reggie?
Well, I don't want to influence things, but I am a bit on the more skeptical side, I must admit. I mean, I got to work perfectly well on my electric bike this morning, so it seemed to be the quickest way of getting across Freiburg. But
I missed the tram, right? So it's.
And you were an hour late because you got on the wrong tram. So electric transport isn't always the answer, is it?
Yeah. Okay, I think you have about 20 seconds left. So if you haven't decided yet, this is the final countdown. I'm going to make it 10 seconds from now on, and then we will find out who makes it and who doesn't make it to the next round of our little competition here. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and voting is now closed. So I hope you're all happy with the choices you made. Reggie, are you curious to find out who got kicked out?
I'm so excited.
All right, then let's see the results right now.
So the machinations are building.
Ooh,
oh, wow.
Oh.
So this is quite complex here, isn't it?
So we have number 6, EVs are not significantly better for cities than petrol or diesel cars. And number 8, there won't be enough green energy for all cars to be electric. Interesting. So I guess our audience is not as optimistic as our experts were.
But I think this is quite interesting because I expected more of already at this stage, of polarization in the fairy tales. So there's still all to play for, as they say.
Yeah. Okay, but these 2 are out. The decision's been made. And let's move on to the next round. What are we going to do here, Reggie?
I think let's let's get a sentence from everybody to get your opening pitch on some of these statements. And let's go through them one by one, starting with you, Jana. I'd like to ask you about this. The current EV approach doesn't reduce car ownership. And I think you agreed with that statement, didn't you, during the...
Yes.
So what's your one sentence justification of that?
I think we need to share more and less own, because a car is standing 23 hours a day around and doing nothing. So you can do a more share approach.
Okay, and I think city governments may be on your side in that phrase from the rest of the conference that we've had. And then on the other side, the private sector's role is to lead the funding of charging infrastructure. So how much should the people making money out of it, actually put their hands in their pockets to actually deliver that infrastructure?
I think more that the private sector should fund these infrastructure, because the public sector also didn't build gas stations.
Yeah.
And if the cities won't have a return on investment if they build the infrastructure, but it's the earnings go to a private company. So private companies have to invest in this.
Okay, that sounds logical and pragmatic to me.
All right, well then let's go to Andrea and the next statement, speaking of charging points. Andrea, city authorities should lead in providing public EV charging points. I think you guys all agreed on this. Why is that?
Yeah, look, emissions is a public health problem. And so, we have to use our city.
Oh, I think we might then come back to you in a moment. So are you back with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you now. All right, let's start over. Let's try this again. Why?
All right.
I don't know who was hacking us. Maybe someone who
Just tell my
doesn't
son to
agree
get off his
with you.
PlayStation.
Okay, city authorities should lead in providing public EV charging points. Why is that?
Yeah, so look, the emissions is a public health emergency. It's making people sick. It's making our children sick and our vulnerable people sick. So governments and cities have to lead the way in solving this. And we have a solution, which is electric cars and bikes, don't get me wrong. And so they should do everything they can to provide the infrastructure to enable people to go electric and not be driving heavily emitting vehicles through our city centres and hurting our children.
All right, that's a good point. We'll go back to that maybe if it makes it to the next round. And then the next statement was, electric cars give everyone a sustainable alternative to petrol and diesel cars. Is that true or is that not true?
I mean, I think that's true. Again, I work for an environmental charity, so like Reggie, I am on the side of e-bikes as well. But in terms of cars, yes, absolutely. Second-hand cars are coming onto the market now, so they are an extremely affordable proposition. So I think they are a great solution for everyone if they can't cycle.
All right, then I guess we're going to the next statement, Reggie.
Exactly. I hadn't thought about that second-hand market contribution either, so that's great. So number 5, which is still in at the moment, EV charging infrastructure belongs in our streets. And I'd like to challenge Paul on that one, if we can bring him up on screen. So do we need the charging infrastructure in our actual streets here, Paul?
Yes, I strongly believe so. We don't have, or not everybody has access to private parking, so we need to have charging infrastructure available other places as well, like on public streets.
Okay, thanks for being nice and succinct on that. And I think the next one has already dropped out, hasn't it? I think so. We kind of think there is an advantage here on electric cars, so let's clear that one out of the way, please. And we'll challenge Paul on the one about the government incentives. So a lot of countries have these big incentives for buying a car, but they're not matched by incentives for other mode of transport. So what do you think about that?
So on the one appearing on the next slide, we'll discuss now.
Yeah, so if we move the slide forward and hear from Paul on that.
Well, I think we have to keep two thoughts in mind at the same time, and you should then incentivize EVs, but you should also look at other non-car options as well as sharing options. There has to be a mix of solutions here. there's not one clear answer to that.
Okay, again, they're playing very friendly so far.
Yeah. All right, then let's get to the final two in this round. So the next one, there won't be enough green energy for all cars to be electric, has already been kicked out as well. So now that we get to you, Patrick, we will be talking about the electric cars play a key role in solving climate change. Is that true or is that not true?
I agree with that. So I think it's very obvious that ICE cars, internal combustion engine cars, have contributed to climate change. Primarily, the burning of fossil fuels, one of the biggest reasons for burning fossil fuels. And in order to stop that, we need to switch to electric mobility. And the payback is quite quick. 2 years of driving and emissions break even has already occurred.
All right, let's see if it makes it to the next round. I think, Regin, I might have some questions to potentially challenge you on that. But first, let's go to the final quote, which is more EVs mean better and more efficient technology development. Is that true or not?
Absolutely. I think the industry is ripe for disruption. We've made cars essentially in the same pattern for decades, if not almost 100 years. And so with the advent of electric mobility, the entire automobile can be constructed in a different fashion and in a safer fashion for both drivers and producers. And that comes with it a spur in technology, including the computing and processing power of vehicles and all the technology that goes into that.
All right, thank you. Then this is already the end of our next round, which means we're going to be voting again. So same question, which of these fairy tale statements do you least support or most disagree with? This time you get to pick 4 statements that are getting kicked out. You're all a bit more familiar with them by now, so we're only giving you 30 seconds. So get ready, go to Mentimeter again. The link is again in the chat if you've lost it. And voting starts now. So, Reggie, what'd you think? Did they already convince you with some of their arguments?
They came up with some interesting things that I hadn't heard before, but I'm not sure if they're, that persuasive. So let's see if they can challenge each other in some of the future rounds when we talk about these issues.
Yeah, and let's see if they could convince the audience, because you only have 7 seconds left, and then voting is already closed this time. So I hope you've made your decisions, because the time is up. Voting is now closed, and we will now again find out which of these fairy tale statements do get eliminated. So let's see the results.
Righty-ho.
Ooh, okay, so we have number 9, electric cars play a key role in solving climate change, kicked out.
Well, that's a surprise, isn't it? Because the panel are very keen on this key rock thing. So
I guess we won't be talking about that anymore then. And then number 4, electric cars give everyone a sustainable alternative to petrol and diesel cars. So again, a more critical one getting eliminated. And number 3 and number 5 are also out of the running. So the private sector's role is no longer in, and that EV charging infrastructure belongs on our street. So these are the 4 that we're eliminating now, and now we're moving on to the third round.
Yeah, so we don't, we've got down to a smaller number of statements now, but we're not here to be superficial about life. This, whether we use EVs or not, has a really big implication on how our cities function in the future. So we want to spend a little bit more time now exploring some of these issues in a little bit more detail. So let's pair up the panelists that we've got with us today, and let's offer one statement to each of them. So if I can bring up Patrick and Andrea, if that's possible, perfect. And we're in the Palace of Freiburg, and you're in the kitchen department and the bedroom department, so this is absolutely perfect to keep you apart in case there's any disagreement today. So I'll read out the first one that remains on our list about the current approach to EVs not reducing car ownership enough. So this is more about what's the point in having as many EV and electric cars we're talking about specifically here as we have ICE cars at the moment, combustion engine cars. So do you both agree on this issue? And Andrea, I'd invite you to start on this, running a EV fleet business yourself.
Yeah, look, I mean, yes, we need to have fewer cars on the road, but by the same token, you can't just have plonk electric vehicle cars to share on the road if people don't know how to drive them. And how are they going to learn how to drive them unless it's experience really of having their own, or having enough on the road that their neighbour has one and can show them the ropes of it. So I don't think you can go straight from ICE cars to electric car sharing. I think there has to be a midway of more electric vehicle, ownership.
So Patrick, where does this transition come if you agree with that? When do car companies stop marketing cars for individual sale and start developing sharing systems, which have not really been that successful in the past?
I mean, I think sharing systems will come most likely once we see autonomous driving. Now, there's a certain autonomous driving advocate, Elon Musk, that says it's always 2 weeks away. And then there's more skeptics that say it's decades or never. So once we have autonomous driving, it takes the inconvenience of having to go to a vehicle, and it takes the inconvenience of having to store a vehicle out of the concern of the person that's using the vehicle. So that's when I really think that we'll see a reduction in the number of cars. Now, do we need to reduce the total number of cars worldwide? Probably yes, because there's a lot of resources going into mining and extraction and manufacturing. And so just going to replace our fleet as opposed to shrinking our fleet isn't going to solve some of the material issues that we're seeing globally.
I don't know if you caught in the news recently that, speaking of Elon Musk, his company has made quite an advance in the financial markets recently by having an agreement with a shared a car hire company. Do you think that's maybe an interesting way that car manufacturers can actually push and influence this other people working in the shared mobility sector, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when you're holding or working in a really large fleet, things like your marginal or variable costs are extremely important. I used to work in the oil and gas industry, and I saw truck driving companies that argued over 1 penny per liter on their monthly contracts. So when you put electric vehicles into the fleets of police departments, or you put them into the fleets of rental companies, and it drives down maintenance and it drives down fueling costs, that has a major ripple-on effect for these companies. And that's why we saw Hertz say we want to purchase 100,000 of these cars, because they know over the long term their costs are going to drop a very large amount, and it leads to a better experience for the customers.
I just want to jump in there if I can. So as a fleet manager, I've actually done that. So I've reduced the number of cars in my fleet and rely on car sharing organizations, and it actually works pretty well. So, there's a financial gain, obviously, as well as an environmental gain to doing that.
So you both think, in terms of this, the phrase that we're discussing, EVs not reducing car ownership enough, there's still a role for ownership, but there's also the parallel sharing model that could be advanced a bit further.
Well, there is as well. I don't see any ICE manufacturers making self-driving cars. So if we do want to get to the stage where we're sharing autonomous cars, it has to be financially viable that we're selling enough electric cars for that research to be made.
Okay, so there's very much a link between these two technology agendas coming forward in enabling one another. Autonomous vehicles starting and stopping with electric power sounds sensible, rather than some diesel thing chugging around without anyone steering it. It seems a bit dangerous to me.
Terrific.
Okay, is that sufficient discussion for that phrase?
I guess so, yeah.
Thank you very much.
So the audience got all the input they needed, and let's move on to another pairing. We would like to bring up Jana with us, and yes, Paul in the studio, on the screen, to discuss the next statement, which was the private sector's role is to lead the funding of charging infrastructure. Jana, you already commented on it a bit, so Paul, I want to briefly ask your opinion on this. What do you think?
I think the private sector has to take an active role with the support of the public sector. And then the public sector in terms of making space available, etc. But we have to make the investments. And if the public sector makes funding available, they have to also get a return on this investment. So I think public sector has to take part in this. But of course, the private sector, like the petrol stations, will take an active part. We see that in Norway already, for instance.
Jana, do you agree with what Paul said?
Yes, I agree in part, because if we see charging infrastructure as Tesla built, for example, with the superchargers and the destination charging network, it was not funded by the public, it was only privately funded. And they're making a return on investment on that infrastructure because they can sell more cars because they have good infrastructure. And we see that some companies don't build infrastructure as they could because they're waiting for public funding, like Ionergy. They like to get money from the state, from the government, from the European Union. But there are big companies, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, Opel, to say PSA, and Hyundai and Volkswagen. And they have enough money. They can build infrastructure. They don't need public money for that. Well, the only thing the public has to do is what Paul said, make space available and make the process of building infrastructure easier, to reduce bureaucracy so that they can build quicker and faster and easier.
But then let me ask you both. If the government does that, what rules should apply for these for the private sector when they provide charging points?
Sorry?
What rules should apply for the private sector? What rules should the government require when they give away the rights to use public land for that?
Yeah, they have to regulate the market so that I don't get poor if I plug in my car in a foreign country. So I've got France and I plug in my car. I sometimes have the same problem like at the end of the 90s when I had my mobile phone with me and I accidentally turned on the internet in France. So I was bankrupt. And that could also happen with EV charging, even in Germany. Or if you have a German card, a charging card, and you go to another network, you can get still very bad surprises on your bill. There is no regulation in place and now how much roaming fees could be and so on. So that must be regulated. And it also must be regulated that everyone has to have access to that infrastructure. So if the public makes space available, everyone has to have access and not a contract with this supplier.
Paul, do you agree with that?
Yeah, I agree with that, completely agree with that. And like Jana says, the mobile industry is a good example where a couple of years ago you had tremendous cost when you use your phone in a different country or use a different operator, and which has been regulated so that it's not now a fair cost structure. And I think we have to get there with EV charging as well. And we will get there quite soon, I think. And at the same time, I think we need the funding from the public sector in order to put up charging stations where it's not feasible to get return on investment, because you have to have charging stations also in remote areas where there's not a lot of traffic, and there you need the funding and the support to get the infrastructure built out.
But if I
yes, please.
Sorry, Paul. But if I like to add, there is not only the energy suppliers who could build infrastructure. There's also like supermarkets and shopping centers and a touristic destination who could they could build infrastructure like destination charging, AC charging networks. Sorry, Paul.
Yeah, and I agree with you. You can have charging infrastructure many places with AC and DC and all those different things. But the charging point is not the only part there. You also have to have the grid to supply the power to the charging stations. So, and there, if it's the at least the energy companies or the grid companies has to take a role in there, and they're important. If not, you won't be able to supply enough energy. We discussed, or one of the points was, is there enough clean energy? And it will definitely be enough, but you have to distribute it somehow in a good way.
Do you agree with that?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, absolutely.
Okay,
In Germany, we're in a lucky situation with our power grid to have good coverage of strong power.
Yeah. I feel like this is just a reminder for the audience that we'll actually have a session where we will talk about energy provision for EVs tomorrow morning. But I think this is then where we will close the discussion on that quote. some disagreement there to the extent in which governments should be involved, but overall, I guess the two of you see eye to eye. So, Reggie, should we move on to the next pair?
Yeah, and let's keep Paul on the screen for the purposes of this and bring in Andrea, as if by magic. So the next one we've got here is this issue about balance between different modes of transport. Why should a family, if they want to buy a cargo bike for 6,000 euros, not receive an incentive? But if they decide to buy a car for 30 or 40,000 euros, the government helps them pay for that. Is this a fair system? Andrea, where do you stand on this?
I'm glad you started with me, because actually in Scotland you do get an incentive if you want to buy an electric bike. So you get the same incentives and interest-free loans from the government if you want to buy an electric bike as you do if you want to buy an electric car, and that includes second-hand electric cars to make it affordable. So I'm going to say you should.
And what's driven this move from the government, do you think? Why does it differ from some other nations that don't have these policies yet?
I mean, I suppose I'm quite surprised to hear that other nations don't have that. I think it is just a concern for emissions, a concern for the planet, a realisation that is that the way that we should all be going. Yeah, as I say, I'm quite surprised to hear that other governments haven't done that. But yeah, in terms of air quality, public health, it's a really important thing to incentivise these things as much as possible.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Yep, there's certainly an imbalance, at least, in a lot of countries in the incentives that are offered. Paul, have you ever considered buying an electric cargo bike? And if you did, would your government incentives weigh on your mind as to whether you made the choice between that and a different form of transport?
I would definitely buy an electric cargo bike, and at points it has been supported in Oslo, at least, maybe not in the rest of Norway. So I agree with Andrea on that. I'm surprised that that's not being supported more, and at least in places where it's feasible to use a bike instead of a car. This discussion in Norway is, of course, that 6 months of the year we have snow and it's not possible to go on bike. I disagree with that. I think it's still possible. You just need to dress up properly. But so bikes and other means of transportation should be incentivized as well as the electric cars. And I think we just have to see that it takes time before everybody's ready to share. And I think with time, the younger generations is more open to both sharing and using other means of transportation than my generation is, at least. Like you said, I'm an old petrol head turned electric, and I'm into both sharing and electric cars, and I'm sorry that not more of my generation sees it the same way, but it's convenient to have your own car and you're used to that, so it just takes time, and we will see.
Well, no doubt we can raise your profile as an influencer after this event through some of the quotes that you've been delivering us today, and put you on a new platform. But Andrea, it's not just about the vehicles themselves, is it? It's the charging infrastructure. And I know even there's a lot of money going to supporting private households actually having a private charging point within their driveway. Do you think, is this a sustainable model going forward, or is this necessary at this point in the transition?
It's interesting because certainly in terms of the UK, our grants are going down to help householders. So certainly in the beginning, your full home charge point is funded, and the grants are kind of going down as they become more and more common. But of course, the price of the install and the price of the actual hardware, of course, the cost of them are going down as well. So look, I think it's a quick, easy win for people that have their own drives to go electric, because they're always going to be able to charge when they get home. So I can certainly understand. I benefited from a grant to install my charge point in my home, so I'm not going to turn around and say that was a dreadful idea. I'm on a relatively low income, so that actually definitely helped with the transition for me. So I think these things are important to incentivize, but there has to, of course, be a limit. There's not an endless pot of money. So as the costs reduce, of course, the grants should reduce as well.
Okay, so we see how that pans out in the future and see how how comfortable people feel with their neighbours getting large incentives for EVs when they may be not able to access some of the incentives on offer. But I think some of the general message here is agreement with some sort of balance and consideration of other.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly, there would be nothing to stop my neighbour from getting the same incentives. So, you know, we can't put neighbours against each other here. You know, so I think, you know, in suburbia, you know, lovely green day here in Scotland, that absolutely there's incentives to get solar panels to help charge those EVs as well. So, you know, it's yeah, I think it's quite a quick, easy win. I think ensuring that there's enough chargers for the on-street parking is a slightly harder one.
Okay, that's interesting. You brought in solar at the last minute there, because that obviously has not just vehicle benefits, it has domestic benefits, and being able to store energy has all sorts of other non-transport considerations. So maybe there's a bigger picture there that we should delve into.
There certainly is, and I'll just say very quickly as well, I think it can sometimes be a misconception that, you know, EV drivers think that that's it, they've done their part. You know, certainly in the EV community, they are cycling enthusiasts, they have solar panels, you know, air source heat pumps. So, you know, they see it as, or we see it as very much a piece of the puzzle and not just an end into itself, you know. So there maybe is a bit of a misconception that, you know, we think that's our environmental impact, you know, done with. It's not actually. We're some of the most environmentally involved people that you can meet.
Okay, fine. Well, I love a gadget, Jasmine, so maybe this is the way to get me on board. Okay, well, Patrick's been patiently waiting in the wings, and I'm sure he's been building up to having a say on this final statement here, and welcome back to Jana as well in the Palace of Freiburg. Jana, I'd like to start with you about this issue of technology development and whether the scale that we have with electric vehicles now actually allows us to develop maybe the technology for electric vehicles and this autonomous agenda going forward. So are we mature enough with EV technology at the moment that we can just adapt things going forward, or do you think there's still radical steps that will come forward in the propulsion systems and the cars that we use? Long question, I know.
I think according to the motors, there is not much we can wait, because the electric motor is already the most efficient machine we have, except from the pedal machine. Like if you go by bike, you're more efficient like than an electric motor. But when it comes to batteries, we all know those headlines every week: new battery for 1,000 miles, 5,000 miles, charge up in 2 minutes, etc., etc. So I think when it comes to batteries, we will see more development and more. Just look back 8 years. My first car was a Renault Zoe, and it has a 24 kilowatt hour battery. And now the same car has the same battery size and has 50 kilowatt hours of battery, but which has the same weight as 8 years ago. So we doubled the capacity for the same space. And there will be more to develop, looking towards the new Tesla battery, the 4680 or 4670 battery with a dry cathode. So it's more environmental friendly. We'll see a reducement of cobalt more and more, and new materials coming in that are not so problematic as cobalt or lithium. And yeah, and we don't need the batteries only for the cars. For mobile devices, we also need the batteries to storage renewable energy, solar, wind, and other renewable energies. So and if we build more electric cars and develop more or invest more into the research of batteries, we also can go on with the energy transition.
Okay, well, perspectives. Patrick, I want to catch you off guard here and talk about actually making vehicles smaller through technology. So, and Jana was telling us about having the same battery size but doubling its capacity. Well, if we can double capacity, can't we make vehicles smaller and lighter and achieve a better solution for cities?
Yeah, and I think actually electric vehicles are a bit of an enabler for technology change. It doesn't guarantee the technology change will come. I think what's really pushing that technology change is a new entrant competitor with Tesla actually saying, hey, now that we're on an EV platform, we can actually make the most of it. So they put more space in the front. There's a trunk in the front or a frunk. There's more space in the back with a double trunk where underneath you could have another kind of closed area. And so what does that mean? Well, you could have more internal space for occupants while keeping the footprint of the car externally the same. At the same time, in order to improve efficiency, there's a lot of material science that's happening. In the case of Tesla, they're relying on their engineering at SpaceX to come up with new materials to make gigacasting. So instead of taking the traditional approach of a bunch of steel pieces that then get bolted and welded together, they could just injection mold an entire piece of car, almost like making a toy car for kids. So with that, you improve weight, you reduce size, and you make the experience for the consumer better and the production experience much more efficient. Now, when it comes to the demand for what consumers are actually going to demand, are we going to change the behavior? Are we going to change the status, feel, and symbol of a big car? Perhaps not. And so that could be still a problem, just because you could make something smaller while keeping it just as safe and keeping the internal room just as much. Does that mean that people are then going to go out and say, I want a car that looks smaller? So now that they have the ability to have a same size car with more room, we might see the rebound effect, where it gets cheaper and it gets kind of easier to have a large car, so they go for it. So I think that consumer perception and consumer demand actually plays a really big role here. But the technology does unlock the ability to really reduce size if people demanded it. And perhaps that's a role for regulators.
Okay.
Patrick, let me ask you a question here, because you mentioned SpaceX, and I want to draw the analogy here. You know, now we have a lot of competition with all these billionaires going to space, and we have space tourism, which is, everyone says, you know, is great for the technological development. But at the same time, it's definitely not sustainable. So is this even worth it that we now have competition in the EV sector? Is this going to get us where we want to go?
Technology always comes with disruption, and it's hard to say where that disruption is going to benefit society. If it wasn't for the space race originally with getting to the moon, we wouldn't have our GPS systems, which could do all kinds of amazing things for us, even just monitoring mining sites, monitoring deforestation. So you have no idea, or one has no idea, what the trickle-on effect is going to be from that. Now, is it a one or the other? Are we mad at Elon Musk because he's flying away from Earth towards Mars, and therefore he's not doing anything else? Obviously, that's not true. He's probably done more for the world when it comes to electrification than any other single individual. And so it's not an either or, I think, here. It's perhaps a little bit of a yes, but. But if you're thinking super long term, like these people that want to colonize Mars, at some point the Earth will be uninhabitable. Hopefully not because of human influence, but at some point it will. And so actually, when you're thinking about the preciousness of higher intelligence and the preciousness of life, it's an escape hatch for thousands of years from now, millions of years from now. And so I think it's somewhat unrelated to what they're doing on Earth for all the other things that they're involved in. It's a cool hobby. I don't blame them for having it.
Can I just bring us back down from Mars to Brussels or Strasbourg? And Jana, doesn't the European Commission just need to step in here and say, look, we need smaller vehicles in our cities, and this needs to be something that car manufacturers just have to adhere to, like they've adhered to many other standards in the past?
Let me be a little bit radical. We don't need cars in our cities at all. So I was this morning before I came to Freiburg, I had to go to the Wertstoffhof, to the recycling station and then I had to go to the city to charge up my car because it was rather empty. And I needed around 30 minutes to go to the charging hub in the city because it was totally congested. It was full of cars and everyone was sitting in a like 2.5-ton SUV as big as a VW bus alone with a little child. That's very, very unnerving. And when you look to other cities like Oslo, or that's what Paris is starting to do, is to ban cars from the city, make public transport more attractive, make it more dense, make space for bikes. So when I go to the city in Stuttgart, I rather choose the bike to go to the city because I know I can park it everywhere. But the thing is, the infrastructure is very bad, so you have to be very peaceful with your life because maybe you're not coming home again. So we need not only change the way of propellant for the cars, we also need to think about which mode of transport do we use for which kind of use.
Okay, integrated thinking, which is what Informed Cities is all about, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Right, I feel we need a bit of more energy here. We've got a bit serious,
Yeah.
haven't we, all of a sudden? But
Well,
that's
maybe
good.
we should vote one more time. Let's kick out another two so that we at the finale we're down to only 2 contestants. So same question as before. You know it by now. Which of the statements do you support the least? This time again, you get to pick 2, and voting opens now for 30 seconds again. Did you hear anything surprising, Reggie?
There was loads of stuff there. I mean, I wonder when Tesla's actually going to start opening its charging points to VW owners. This is all the conversation between the chief execs, and this is, can they stay only for Tesla forever? Or
in 2 weeks.
in 2 weeks? Yeah.
2 weeks, I see. You got the inside scoop.
No, it's always 2 weeks with Tesla.
Yeah, but I saw Porsche. I went between here and Freiburg City Centre. There's a Porsche garage, and they have charging points. But obviously, when there's as many cars on the road as Porsches, it's a bit easier, isn't it? So.
Okay, I think actually that the time is already up, so voting is now closed. I'm very curious to see now which are the 2 statements that have made it to the finale. So let's see the results. Okay, number 2 is out. So the private sector doesn't make it to the finale. And number 10, more EVs means better technology. So I guess we're not keen on going to Mars just yet. But number 7, government incentives for EVs must focus on non-car options, is in the finale. And our current approach to EVs does not help reduce car ownership enough. Okay, so both, fairly critical or not too car friendly, Reggie, I guess.
Yeah, I don't think our panel have really been persuasive enough, have they, today? If they're trying to advocate EVs, we've ended up with just 2 balanced options. But
you got one more chance, I guess, because this is it. You will have to make your final decision, you as the audience, and then you as our experts, and we will then make the final decision.
So we've got 2 final phrases here, haven't we? Shall we get the panelists to really choose one of these phrases?
This is how this works. This is how the show works. You end up with 2. Those are the 2 you picked, and well, which one is your true love, your fairy tale ending?
Okay, and one of these is going to get the rose. So, how are we going to do this?
Let's give them 30 seconds each to make a final pitch
Okay.
per statement. So you get to pick.
So the final 2 statements we have is about the current approach to EVs not being focused enough on reducing car ownership and the need for EV incentives to be more balanced. So I'm going to start with you as you're here with us in the studio, Jana. Which of these is the future of electric mobility?
I think they're both on the same side because, as I just said, we have to change our modal behavior when it comes to transportation. And we can do that if we incentive more public transport, but there must be also public transport because if now everybody goes by train, the train will be too full and they can't handle it. And also to subsidize bikes or e-bikes. So we had a debate in Germany about the Green Party said 1,000 euros for a cargo bike, and
Okay.
it was lovely.
I'm going to have to cut you off there.
That's number 7, yes?
Number 7.
You pick number 7. Okay. The next one up, Andrea, which one are you going to pick?
Yeah, like I think the second one, I very much agree with Jana. They're pieces of a puzzle in fleet and in life. It's the right vehicle for the right journey. So yes, we should be looking at electric cars. We should be looking at trains. We should be looking at electric scooters, electric bikes. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Paul, come in from Norway and tell us which of the two you favor.
I favor the first one. Our current approach definitely doesn't help reduce car ownership enough. But like Jana said, I think they're both on the same side in a way. But we have to build other means of possibilities for transportation as well in parallel, and give incentives for both public transport and e-bikes and sharing of electric cars. In order to reduce it, you have to have good options not to own your own cars.
All right, thank you. And then Patrick, final word for you. Is it another 7 or the second vote for the first statement?
So my fairy tale is number 1. So number 7 is my bad dream. And I'll argue against it because it's my bad dream. So I think that governments should be subsidizing where they get the largest marginal return on benefit. And if you're taking someone from a vehicle or from walking and putting them on an electric bike, that's doing nothing for climate. The problem sits currently with car drivers, and I don't believe that better transit or electric bikes are going to get car drivers at the level necessary out of their cars. And therefore, the best marginal return is by getting them out of their ICE cars into EV cars, and that's the best way to reduce emissions.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. So arguing for number 1 by arguing against number 7. So that's a tie, I guess, among our experts.
Pretty much.
Let's see which one could sway the audience the most. This is it. This is our final vote. And this time, this is very important, we're asking you to vote for your favorite. So we're picking the winner. You're not picking the one you're kicking out. You get to vote for the winner for your e-mobility fairy tale of the future, so to say. So again, 30 seconds on the clock, and they are starting now. I got a final rose to give, Reggie. This is how the show works, so we're going to give away the final rose.
No expense spared.
Do you know which one you'd pick? We made our experts choose. I guess we have to too.
I think it's interesting about there's always going to be a hard-to-reach audience here that you're never going to necessarily get to these other modes of transport, and isn't it better to make them sustainable? But I think we've ended up with 2 quite good fairy tales, I think.
I think if I had to choose, probably choose number 1, but we'll find out now. Everyone, last couple of seconds, and then voting is now officially closed. So I guess this is it. We'll now find out what the audience choose. We'll find out who the winner is of this Informed Cities Forum Bachelor Edition. And it is number 7, government incentives for EVs must focus on incentives. We have a little bit of props to play around with right now for non-car options. Okay, so I guess the ladies in this round made their point. We have a winner. We have a final round. I hope you guys all enjoyed this. I hope you all, the 4 of you did. We really loved your input. Thank you all so much. Thank you to the audience for participating. Reggie, any final words?
No, a big thanks. I think we want to kind of grow up the debate about electric vehicles. I'm a skeptic. There's more for us to all think about, and let's kind of make the arguments, but not be too polarized about how we take the agenda forward in the coming years.
Yeah, so thank you all for joining. We have 3 more sessions coming up tomorrow. This one was the closing of today, and we'll start off tomorrow with accessibility of adaptive heritage. And and we got some mobility talks coming up as well. So join us tomorrow. Thanks to the 4 of you. Thanks to the audience, and see you then.
Bye.